I'm Matěj Skalický, and this is Czech Radio News Podcast Vinohradská 12. We're all running out of time. Moscow only makes concessions when it feels weak, says Dmytro Kuleba, a former Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's today's special guest on Vinohradská 12. How does he think the super crisis between Washington and Kyiv can be resolved? It's Friday, March 7th. Hi, Mr. Kuleba, and welcome to the program.
Hi, Czechia. It's good to be with you.
Thank you very much for joining us. So, can you tell me, how would you describe what happened at the White House between President Zelensky and President Trump in just one word or just in one short sentence?
Super crisis.
Super crisis.
Yes, that's what happened at the White House, and it will go down in the textbooks on diplomacy, politics, negotiation, and all other relevant subjects.
So what now? Should President Zelensky apologize for the heated argument at the White House, or do you think it was good that he stood up to Trump?
Well, he already made his move when he posted on social media a long text saying that he regrets what happened at the White House. It shouldn't have happened this way, that he's looking forward to working under strong leadership of President Trump, and that Ukraine is ready for negotiations. So President Trump quoted or referred to this message in his address to the Congress, and now US and Ukrainian officials resumed contacts. So I think that they will keep working. I mean, the White House and Bankova, which is the street name where Ukraine's president office is, they will continue to work together. But, of course, the decision to suspend arms deliveries to Ukraine remains to be suspended. We heard that intelligence sharing has been put on hold as well.
Yes.
And all of this was done following the crisis at the Oval Office and has not been revoked yet after the resumption of contacts between the White House and Kyiv. In that sense, we are today in a worse position.
As far as I know, you previously said that it would be a critical moment in the war if President Trump announced the end of the US military aid to Ukraine. And that happened. Now we are here. So are you worried that Ukraine can lose the war to Russia without US support and without the sharing of the intelligence as well?
It definitely significantly worsens capabilities of the Ukrainian army. However, the immediate consequences of this decision will not be felt on the front line. But as the war will progress, if this decision is not revoked, then the impact of these decisions will be felt more and more. And then, since we have some time in our pocket, how much this crisis can be mitigated depends on three factors. First, how much can Ukraine ramp up its production of weapons? Second, how much more weapons can our European partners produce and procure in the world and deliver to Ukraine? And third, of course, whether at certain stage of negotiations, these US decisions on arms and intel can be revoked. So the final answer to your question depends on how these questions will be answered. But what has happened when this decision was announced puts our army in a much more difficult situation. And this is why I was urging not to allow this to happen.
And how to revoke the US position on arms and intel? How can the US-Ukrainian partnership can be fixed? You said that Zelensky made his move, but is this enough? Because you mentioned on Instagram that Ukraine will need to offer Trump something.
Well, my understanding is that the United States will keep Ukraine on the hook. And that hook will be this decision on sending weapons and sharing intel. And in return, they will be demanding further concessions from Ukraine in negotiations on the ceasefire. This is how it seems it is going to evolve.
And can Zelensky still be at the table with Trump, dealing about the peace?
Yeah, I have no doubts about this. I mean, do not over-exaggerate how Trump treats foreign leaders. Today he calls you a dictator, but then you do what he wants and he calls you a nice guy and admires your leadership. Then you do something that he dislikes again. and he says that he does not see the way to work with you. Then you do something good to something that he wants again, and he changes his mind. So I have no doubts that as long as President Trump will be satisfied with President Zelensky's approach to negotiations on the ceasefire, he will be an acceptable figure for him. But the moment something goes wrong, all the might of Trump/Musk information machine will assault Zelensky and start destroying him.
Is rare earth minerals deal also a key to any future talks? And is it a good bargain for Ukraine?
It's not a bargain anymore. It's done. This is it. And both sides understand it. Signature is just a technical moment. So it's off the table because it's done, completed. The US achieved what they wanted. And from the very beginning, to be honest, I was saying that there was zero chances that this deal would not be signed. It was just a matter of the final wording of this document.
And is it a good deal for Ukraine?
Well, in the current text, as it stands, I don't see big threats in it. The way it is framed and perceived by the public opinion is that it is bad, because people don't like to give away something by definition, and that's how it was framed in the public discourse. But the current text does not imply that Ukraine gives away anything. It's a more kind of joint investment, joint exploration agreement that is being concluded. Of course, the situation may change with the conclusion of the second agreement, which will be on the fund itself, on the fund that will run these investments and assets. But that will remain to be seen. For the time being, I don't see this deal as a strategic problem for Ukraine.
And are there any security guarantees in the deal right now? Because that's what Ukraine wants.
No, to the best of my knowledge, this is not in the text. It's a purely economic agreement. And this is the biggest disadvantage of it. But to the best of my understanding, the US, the United States, were never of the position that they would include any specific security guarantee in the text. They agreed to mention in the text the need for security guarantees for Ukraine, and they left this issue for further negotiations. But again, listen, this deal was unavoidable. And when I say that in its current form, this deal does not pose a strategic threat, I did not say that this is a strong deal, right? But when you have something unavoidable and you just try to make sure that it's not awfully bad for you, and this deal is not awfully bad. That's it. But is it perfect? No. Does it leave a lot of room for maneuver for the United States? It does. And the reason why actually the whole crisis in the White House happened is exactly that Zelensky tried to hear from Trump what were the specific security guarantees he was willing to give to Ukraine following the conclusion of this agreement. And Trump said basically, I give you my word that everything will be fine. And Zelensky was unhappy with that, so that's how it all went wrong afterwards. So this is, don't get me wrong, this is not a perfect deal, but there was zero chance from the very beginning that it wouldn't be signed. And the only question was, what would be the final text? And this text is not awful. That's it.
So what should any future security guarantees look like, in your opinion, as a former foreign minister?
Well, from everything that is being discussed now, I see ideas and initiatives that may help establish a ceasefire, but they will not prevent Putin from eventually breaking it and restarting the war again. Maybe I'm not aware of something. Perhaps there is something more in the pipeline. But from everything I've heard so far, these are more reassurance measures than security guarantees.
I understand that. So what are the perfect security guarantees you would expect from any deal with the US or Europe?
Now it is without the United States playing on the side of Ukraine and Europe, it is very difficult to imagine such security guarantees. Because if the United States play on the Russian side, which is the case now, it means that whatever Ukraine and Europeans do to contain Russia, Russia will always find the way out. And this is the fundamental problem. So at a certain point, if we really want peace in Ukraine, the United States should realign with Europe on this. And I do not see that coming in the meantime. So in a nutshell, it is good that countries are discussing stepping up defense, increasing deliveries of weapons to Ukraine. It is good that they're talking about potentially sending soldiers to Ukraine, but these are not combat troops, okay? We have to be clear about this. No one is talking about combat troops. It is good that Europe will be developing its own defense industries and intelligence capabilities. But these are not things that can stop Russia. These are the things that can make Ukraine and Europe stronger in opposing Russia.
So what can stop Russia?
Russia can be stopped if Europe and America realign again, if Europe begins to finally invest what it has to invest in its own defense, and if all of the measures to contain Russia that had been implemented between 2022 and 2024 will be implemented in full and not in half or 30% as it was always the case. Then, with the deterioration of Russia's economy, it will create favorable conditions for real talks with Moscow, because Moscow only makes concessions when it feels weak.
Would any realigning EU with US include Ukraine in joining NATO?
I don't think it's going to happen in the short-term perspective, but it would be a dramatical and unforgivable mistake to take this issue off the table.
But Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico, for example, claims that it would spark World War III. American President Donald Trump says Zelensky is gambling with World War III right now. So how would you address their concerns?
Well, Fico and Trump come and go. That's how I would address it.
Should Ukraine agree to give up some land for an immediate ceasefire, in your opinion?
But ceasefire agreements do not imply giving up land. Ceasefire agreements imply that both sides stop shooting and then begin talks on who gets what as part of the peace deal. So this will not be the critical issue at this stage of negotiations. But of course, listen, neither Ukrainian nor Russian officials will be in a position to cede territory or to agree to any kind of dubious status, because for both of them, these territories are by constitution parts of their territories. Of course, for Ukraine, it's legal, right? For Russia, it's illegal, but Russia doesn't care. It is in their constitution. And to the best of my knowledge, and I have been saying this for months, Russia never negotiates what it believes belongs to it. This is why Russia never held a single round of negotiations on Crimea. And to those who would counter-argue saying that they engaged in negotiations on Donbas, on Donetsk and Lugansk regions. Yes, but within the framework of the Minsk process, they always considered these regions as breakaway parts of Ukraine, and they were willing to reintegrate them in Ukraine on their terms. So two sides will come to negotiate land with the text of their constitutions in their hands, saying that these lands are theirs. It will be quite a challenge, but of course, no one is going to concede their territories, because according to the law, this would be high treason, and such person would be prosecuted eventually.
And do you, like Zelensky, worry that the world's major powers, US and Russia, might reach an agreement without Ukraine?
I'm pretty certain that they will be happy to reach an agreement without Ukraine. The problem is that for them is that this agreement cannot be implemented without Ukraine. They will have to talk.
Yes, they will have to talk. And the US and Europe don't want Ukraine to be left out of the talks. They already mentioned that, right?
Yes, and more broadly speaking, if Ukraine is left out of the talks, it means that Europe is also left out. And in the end, Trump will praise himself for making the greatest deal of the century, but Ukraine and Europe will remain exposed to the threat of emboldened Russia. So Ukraine is not alone in this fight.
Yeah. You've already mentioned that Europe is stepping up in the arms enrichment of the continent. Do you think that Europe is doing enough to support Ukraine right now? And can Europe replace US military support that was halted?
Europe has made a lot of right statements and decisions and held very good meetings recently. This is all very encouraging. Today, we're speaking on a day when the European Council is supposed to make a historic decision on what everyone was urging Europe to do, to go to the market and get more money for investments in defense industries. So this seems to be happening right as we speak, which is a real breakthrough. Last unresolved question is taking over Russian frozen assets. Once all of this is done, I will say that Europe did all the right things. But the question of timing remains, because as all of these decisions are being deliberated, drafted, adopted, and prepared for implementation, Ukrainian army is fighting and is shooting out its Patriots, its artillery shells, and losing equipment on the battlefield. So don't get me wrong, I appreciate European efforts. I appreciate in particular the role of Czechia in it. But timing is everything. So everything must be done very fast because we all are running out of time.
And can Europe replace US Patriots?
Europe cannot replace the United States on two things, simply because they do not exist in Europe in sufficient quantities. These are missiles for Patriots and intelligence. The only alternative to Patriots is SAMP-T, the French-Italian air defense, but it just doesn't exist in sufficient quantities, and the production of missiles is so small that...
And it takes a lot of time to produce the missiles.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, when you see reports from Ukraine about the increased number of airstrikes, of missile and drone strikes, in recent days, it's not an accident. Putin knows what he does. He wants our air defense to shoot out our interceptors, and knowing that new deliveries are not coming, he wants our cities to be left exposed to his attacks, and believing that it will make Ukraine more conceding and more flexible in the upcoming negotiations.
So we are discussing arms and deterrence and what's going on right now. Would you say that Ukraine can regret giving up its nuclear weapons in the 90s? Do you think that the West kept its promise to guarantee Ukraine's security without them?
The West did not keep its promise, of course, but today in 2025, 31 years later, after the signing of the Budapest Memorandum, it just doesn't make sense to regret anything anymore. What makes sense is seeking solutions.
And is it the solution to get nuclear weapon again?
No, it's a mockery. No one is going to get. I mean, it's good when politicians and experts are making this point because it sells to the public opinion, but this is very misleading. Ukraine is not going to get nuclear weapons for a very simple reason, because if it decides to do so, all of its remaining partners will turn their backs to Ukraine, including Europe.
Politico outlet, quoting undisclosed sources, writes about secret discussions between Trump's team and Ukrainian opposition, former PM Yulia Tymoshenko and members of the party led by former President Petro Poroshenko. So does it undermine Zelensky's reputation in your view?
In the very specific context of what happened over the last week or so, yes, it does.
Don't you want to help with that? Because you left the Ukrainian government last September. Do you want to come back and help negotiate the end of the war?
No, I'm pretty certain that President Zelensky is sufficiently skilled and talented and experienced to hold any kind of negotiations. So I'm doing what I can help my country with, which is fighting in the war for narratives, for the perception of what is happening. And talking behind the scenes to different people who have impact on the decision makers or to the decision makers themselves, because I want my country to get the best out of what is happening, but I do not necessarily have to be in the government to be able to do it.
I had to ask you because Politico reported that your departure was forced. Is that true?
Well, it wasn't forced. It would have been forced if I opposed the decision of the president, but I didn't, because my working ethics implies that if the president 5 years ago asked me to do a certain job and I told him, "Thank you, Mr. President, I will do my best," and accepted it, and then he tells me that he wants someone else to do this job, all I should tell him is, "Thank you, Mr. President, I did my best." And that's what I did.
In the world of Dmytro Kuleba, how the war should end?
The war is going to end when Russia imperial ambitions are gone and Russia accepts Ukraine's independence and its belonging to the West. I do not see that coming in the near future. Therefore, I'm afraid the war will continue one way or another. It may be less intensified, not at the scale it is happening now. But Putin will continue to try to destroy Ukraine by all means available to him. And there is a lot of struggle ahead. But we should not give up until we secure this future for Ukraine, that Russia accepts who we are and respects us.
And can you imagine that your country will stay divided and some of the parts will stay occupied?
It can happen, but you lose territories only when you accept the loss. As long as you do not accept it and keep looking for ways to return them, the chance to return them remains. This has been proven by history so many times.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, and looking back to history, if we can find a scenario that we could use to help us with thinking of the future of Ukraine. Germany, maybe Korea, what else?
Czechia,
yeah.
Alsace.
Yeah.
For 41 years, it was part of Germany, and then it returned to France.
So can you find a specific scenario in the past and use it for Ukraine? Would it be helpful in thinking
I think we should be less focused on history because, I just gave you one, the case of Alsace. Yes, but on the one hand, history is always the same and it keeps repeating itself. But on the other hand, every situation is special. So there will not be a copy-paste scenario for Ukraine, but some similarities will always be there. Again, I would like to emphasize, you lose when you accept the loss, okay?
Yeah.
As long as you do not accept the loss and you keep fighting, you have a chance to win. And Czechia during the Second World War, and France, for example, Charles de Gaulle, many people like to compare Zelensky's position with the position of Winston Churchill, but I actually always believed that his specific situation is closer to the case of Charles de Gaulle, who was in exile in the United Kingdom, and partners were not willing to do what he wanted, and they were asking him to concede and to agree with the Vichy government, but he was adamantly against it, and he always fought for the Free France, and in the end he got it. So maybe it will not be President Zelensky who will see the final end of the war because it will take more time. But as I said, you have to believe in what you are fighting for.
What is more time? Because Zelensky said recently that the war's end could be very, very far away, and Trump reacted with outrage. So is the end really that far off?
Yes, and 2 days later Zelensky said that he believes the war could end very soon. Pay less attention to all these statements coming from Washington, from Kyiv, because it's a game of words, or game of narratives to engage Trump in a conversation. This is what it's all about. No one knows when the war will end. This is the truth.
In the end, it's all about the strength of the nation and of its soldiers. So how much strength does Ukraine have left?
Enough. Imagine another country who would be able to fight for 3 years in conditions like Ukraine does against an enemy like Russia. For 3 years, Ukraine has been fighting. For 3 years, I've been hearing the West speaking of its war fatigue. For 3 years, we are hearing about the war of attrition that will exhaust Ukraine. For 3 years, we're hearing that Ukraine is exhausted. All of this is happening and Ukraine keeps fighting. I'm not saying that Ukraine is not tired or the West is not tired. Everyone is tired. But we all keep fighting because we know what is at stake.
Okay. Mr. Kuleba, thank you very much for all our answers. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It was a lovely conversation. I hope your listeners will be happy.
And that's all for today. I spoke with Dmytro Kuleba, a former Ukrainian Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for listening.